And thank you for joining us. This is Brian Ross, the Chief Investigative Correspondent for the Law&Crime Network, and you're watching a special report from the Law&Crime Network and for our viewers on YouTube Live and Facebook Live. These are troubling times for all of us, with thousands now dead in this country, tens of thousands in the hospital, hundreds of thousands infected, and millions of people out of work. So this program is to answer any questions you have about those issues about your job, about your home, about your finances, about your health, and about your rights. So now we have two very special guests who will come and join us to answer some of your questions, starting with Marie Napoli, a firm of Marie Napoli and Skolnick, and Steve Hyman, who's chair of the litigation department at the firm of McLaughlin Stern. Thank you very much for joining us. Steve, let me start with you. How are you doing?
In quarantine up here in Vermont. Actually, I've now passed the 14-day mark, so I think I'm free to move about.
And Marie Napoli, how about you? How are you? You working from home?
I'm working from home, and as everyone in my office is working from home, we are a virtual office at the moment. We have all of our lawyers, staff, paralegals, client liaison, IT departments, all working from home. So it's been pretty seamless. As soon as we heard this was going on in China, we started to mobilize our offices to make sure if this happened, we would be prepared.
Well, thank you both for being here. And we have lots of questions from our viewers that we hope you can answer or give some information about. And the best thing to do when people are worried, when they're concerned, when they're afraid, is to know the facts. And that's what we're going to be here for. Let's start with a question from a healthcare worker in New York who gave us this question.
Elia, and I am an adult nurse practitioner in New York. I work in the community as a consultant, but many of my frontline colleagues consult with me. And one question that keeps coming up is if an employer requires a nurse to work on a designated COVID floor, while also saying that masks are not needed when they are taking care of symptomatic patients, what are their rights?
So Marie, why don't you see if you can give a crack at that answer?
Well, you have a right to protect yourself. I would not listen to someone that was telling you that you didn't need a mask. That's ridiculous. They told us after 9/11 that the air was clear. It was not, and we've all seen the results from that. We represented all the firefighters and police officers at 9/11. We also represent all those injured in Flint, Michigan. The government said the water was clear, was fine to drink. It was not. Not going into a situation where you're not given the proper equipment to keep yourself safe. No one is required to do that, and I would not do that. And it would be if you got fired, which I do not think that would happen at this point. They're begging for staff to come in as far as nurses, but you should stick to your guns and make sure that you have the proper equipment before you do anything. And my bit of advice is listen to your gut. If you feel it's wrong, you know it's wrong, it's probably wrong.
All right, Marie, thank you. Steve Hyman, let me ask you, until now, the most famous quarantine case involved a nurse from Doctors Without Borders who had been in Africa dealing with the Ebola crisis. You represented her. Give us a sense of how that case applies to what's happening today.
Well, actually, it probably is more how it does not apply. The difference with the Ebola case is that the disease itself was transmitted by body fluids, not through the air. And what we saw then was that there was quarantine of Casey Hickox when she didn't have to be quarantined. You had immediate tests of the blood to determine whether or not she was symptomatic or contagious. Here you have a very different situation. You have airborne, you have a situation where people come in contact with each other, don't even know they have the disease, and become carriers, and contagion results. So this is a different kind of quarantine. This comes closer probably to the issues that we confronted in the country years ago with the Spanish flu, with yellow fever, and smallpox.
Let me follow up on that question. As you know, there are lots of efforts to sort of stop New Yorkers from leaving New York City and the tri-state area. You're up in Vermont, I'm in Connecticut, Rhode Island's trying to check on New Yorkers. Do New Yorkers have a right to go wherever they want?
They do have a right to go, but there is this public health exception, the scope of which I think is being tested now like never before. And as a result of that, the answer is, I don't know the answer. In the first instance, public health has a right to either quarantine, isolate, stop individuals from going, but whether or not one state can stop citizens from another state from entering leaves me with a big question mark. I don't think that, for instance, Vermont can stop New Yorkers from coming and stop people because of their license plate.
Exactly.
But those issues are going to remain to be seen as they were after 9/11. I mean, Marie's going to have herself a field day with regard to the cases that are going to come out of this.
Well, I would like to add to that.
No doubt, no.
Exactly what Governor Cuomo was filing a lawsuit against Rhode Island because they were stopping cars from New York with New York license plates and not allowing them to enter. As far as I'm concerned, that's unconstitutional. I do think that there could be checkpoints to make sure people don't have temperatures and take other safety measures, but an all-out ban on New Yorkers traveling to other locations, I do not think is legal.
All right. If you're just joining us, you're watching a special report from the Law and Crime Network. Your questions and answers we hope to give you about what's going on with the COVID-19 crisis in this country. And we're joined by two esteemed experts, Steve Hyman from the firm McLaughlin and Stern, and from New York, Marie Napoli from the firm Napoli Stern. Marie, a question from our YouTube viewers. Can a person sue the government if a loved one dies from the virus and the government hasn't done enough?
Well, there are all kinds of sovereign immunity issues when you're suing the government. So when we filed suit on behalf of all the firefighters and police officers, there was a large government immunity issue that we were able to overcome. That's not an easy issue to overcome. So I would have to see, of course, you can always sue, but there will definitely be motion practice. That's definitely their defense that they would put forward. But I assume that either we'd be able to get around that defense, or the government most likely is going to try to afford compensation for people that have been really injured by this virus. And as we can see, they've already put out trillions of dollars to try to help people suffering. And I think that they will continue that into the future, just like they did with 9/11.
All right, lots of questions about, right. And there are lots of questions about your rights in the hospital. And we've got a question from one of our own Law and Crime anchors, Angelica Spanos, who's now pregnant, expecting shortly. And she has a question to put to both of you.
Others are trying to navigate new protocols at New York hospitals during this time of COVID-19. Mothers delivering before results are back because they are being tested upon admittance can be separated from their newborn babies. Now, this can happen because the results aren't in yet or they are still waiting for them. And my question is, as the mom and as a mother, what are your rights? And do you have to be separated? You know, many experts will say that at this time, it's crucial to be near and close to your baby immediately. Can you speak to that, please?
Well,
And
I think
why don't you both take it on, starting with you, Steve Hyman?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the first instance, it's going to be a medical decision on whether or not there's a basis for separation. If I mean, in this whole issue of the contagion of the COVID virus, there can be a legitimate issue if there is a basis to separate. But I have no expertise on that that I can offer anything more on.
I would just add.
And Marie?
I do think you have a constitutional right to be with your child immediately, but the state, the government can supersede even on a constitutional right if they have a compelling state interest, and the way to achieve that compelling state interest is narrowly tailored to that end. So whether or not they could enforce laws that would separate you from your child early on, I think they could in this situation, in this pandemic, to save lives for a short period of time to make sure neither you nor your child was carrying the disease.
All right, good answers. Here's a question from Val, one of our viewers, about how legal are ankle bracelets for those who are positive but do not need to be in the hospital. According to her, a judge in Kentucky is now ordering COVID-19 patients who are refusing to stay home to wear the ankle bracelets. Steve, is that legal?
Yeah, you know, I've been in civil liberties law for a long time, and I mean, is it legal to, I mean, as Marie indicates, there's certainly basic constitutional rights. I don't think a judge has the right just simply to put a bracelet on somebody, but a judge does have the right, depending on the public health law of the state, to have a individual quarantine and remain in that state. So if there has to, however, be some due process with regard to that. There has to be a basis for it. So I would think putting an ankle bracelet on somebody would require some very clear legal right to do so, based upon giving the individual against whom that bracelet is being put a right to contest it and fight such a intrusion.
What do you think, Marie?
I would agree with you, but so the problem is, like in a state, in New York State, all the state courts are just closed down. So you'd have to deem this as an emergency situation. In order, you have to bring an action by an order to show cause and designate it an emergency. And I don't even really know at this point what they will accept as an emergency or not as an emergency. Violating someone's constitutional rights by forcing them to wear an ankle bracelet, I don't know if they would consider that an emergency. You could always bring it in federal court, but those court systems are not completely functional either. Much better than the state courts right now. The federal courts are doing much better than the state courts, but in New York, the state courts are basically shut down. So a lot is going on that's impeding on people's rights, their constitutional rights. And we don't even have the avenue to address those issues that we normally have. So it's really a little bit of the Wild West going on in the legal system, at least in New York State.
And let me ask you this question coming in. Next week is a big week. It's Holy Week. Palm Sunday and Easter in the middle of the week is Passover. Churches have been told and temples have been told not to have large congregations. Some churches have continued to do that. Do they have the legal right to continue to hold services with hundreds of people? Steve Hyman?
No. Where, again, the public health law will trump the basic right to assemble. I mean, I think that contagion will trump the right to meet and assemble. So that the answer to your question, I think, is that there is a right of the state where there is a public health crisis, as there is now, to prohibit assembly in the numbers that, whether it religious or general meeting.
And Marie?
I agree 100%. So all these issues that we've been talking about today are really all constitutional issues. What you have rights to do and not to do, your right of assembly, your right of association are all constitutional rights. And what it is a balancing act as to really what trumps what. Usually those are the highest, the constitutional rights are our highest, most important rights. So usually they always are paramount, but this is unprecedented in our lifetime, in our parents' lifetime, epidemic that is a compelling state interest for the state, for people's safety. And as long as they make these rules closely tailored to the ends, which are compelling, saving lives. As long as they're not saying, oh, you can never congregate, you can never practice your religion in a group together, just during these highly contagious times, I think that that they will prevail. If someone really tried to come forward and say that these rules are unconstitutional, I think that they'll lose. Any judge that's hearing these cases are human, and they know exactly what's going on, as we all do. And I think they're going to say that these people's constitutional rights are going to have to fall to the wayside for the public health right now. Can you hear me? I think we lost our host here today.
Or we may be on a break. I don't know. Do you hear me, Marie?
I hear you. I'm in complete agreement with you on the public health taking precedent